Good day, everybody. I am back after what feels like being sick forever. I was so taken aback by all the positive response about the last video that I made about the Technobarbarians that I decided to make this one a bit of a deep dive. But real quickly, thank you so much for everything. Every like and every comment really means so much to me, and just it's so nice to know that there are people who wants to listen to me yap about this wonderful thing. But anyways, if you want to hear more about the absolutely mad weapons, the mad people of the Unification War, as well as my take on a lot of the loadouts and what you would encounter if you were the Emperor going up against these warlords, you should take a seat and listen to what I have to say here. I will be treading upon some of the known ground from the previous video, but that is more to set the stage in case there are any new listeners and just to take us into the feel of it. So, in any ways, let's start the video. The winds howled across the vast irradiated steppes that had once been Siberia, now a poisonous expanse of ash and shattered ruins, here where the last three hordes of Earth would make their stand. Calagan had drawn all of his remaining forces from his empire together for one final cataclysm. The sky above turned with unnatural storm clouds, torn open by craven chained storm dogs, and the ground itself seemed to bleed when broken by boot and thread. Calagan, the Lord of Earth, stood atop the command deck of Goregrinder, the largest of his red engines, a colossal, smoke-belching super heavy tank festooned with mounted of skulls and dripping banners. His armor's magnificent refractive field reacted to the charged atmosphere, bending light around him in an iridescent hue, making him appear as a living god of war amidst what would soon be a great carnage. In his hand rested Gorecleaver, the massive power axe humming with atomic power, and he knew that on this day it would be tested like never before. Around him surged his chosen soldiers, the blood-marked reavers in sanguine encrusted primitive power armor, howling war chant as they rode gore-flood crawlers and put the sky reavers into position. He gazed upon all of this from his battle platform, and his eyes landed upon his changed storm dogs, their screams already bleeding warp energies from their eyes and ears into the land and sky. Legions of ashborn cannon fodder were driven forward like cattle, being made ready to fall upon the swords and spears of his enemy on this day. Opposite of them, advancing in ranks that made the earth shudder, came the Emperor's host, and at the very forefront he saw them, and a smile broadened upon his face. The Thunder Warriors, gleaming brass and golden in their plate, their bolters and power blades already slick with the blood of lesser warbands he had sent to slow their advance. Flanking them strode the Golden Custodies, led by the legendary Constantine Valdor himself, their guardian spears gleaming, it would seem, in the early morning light. Mortal levies and allied clans followed in vast blocks, but it was the Emperor who dominated the field with his presence. Clad in warplate that would one day evolve into his golden armor, the Emperor advanced without fear, his sword lit with a golden light and his psychic presence a blazing beacon that pushed back at the warp storms. Calagan roared a bellowing war cry, and all became glorious carnage. Red engines surged forward, their atomic-powered cannons thundering. Dirty nuclear power cells blossomed amongst the Imperial lines, vaporizing anyone caught in their radioactive fire. Gore-flood crawlers followed, saturating the ground with aerosolized warp-tainted blood and mutagenic sludge, turning the very battlefield against his opponents, and soldiers would scream as their flesh bubbled and mutated. This, however, was not the true horror, as his pet Zygers, the Storm Dogs, was brought onto the field. Their powers unleashed in unison, creating ripping tempest across the steppes, showering the Emperor's forces in terrible lightning that rang with demonic howls and laughter. The Thunder Warriors met the charge head on, bolter fire barking in disciplined volleys, tearing apart Ashborn hordes and reavers alike with their gene-forged might. The Emperor strode through the madness untouched, his mere presence burning lesser warp entities into ash, and with a gesture he hurled arcs of psychic lightning that detonated entire battle lines. Calagan laughed, a deep savage sound, and ordered the full horde to advance.
Erase them! Leave nothing but red mud!
In the blood-soaked annals of the ancient steppes, few names would strike greater terror than Urs and its merciless warlord Calagan. He was not merely a conqueror, but with the armies at his back, he was a force of raw slaughter and total erasure. His warriors charged into battle wearing primitive power armor, encrusted with dry blood and covered in jagged edges, whereas to hang grisly trophies taken from the field of battle. Whenever they would charge upon the enemies of Urs, all fighting was to be done beneath banners drenched heavy with gore and covered in terrible occult symbology. They lived for one purpose: to annihilate their enemies so completely that nothing, not their people, not their culture, not even their memory, would remain. And at the heart of this apocalyptic horde strode Calagan himself, a rampaging warlord who embodied slaughter incarnate. Built for dominance in the brutal heart of melee carnage amid psychic storms and demonic incursions, he was a living nightmare on the battlefield. He wore the armor of pearl, a legendary Dark Age of Technology era artificer suit with a true masterwork refractor field that would bend light into a shimmering pearlescent haze, making him nearly untouchable by any conventional firearms and brutally resistant to even tank-grade weaponry point blank. Blood grooves and trophy hooks dangled from this armor, ready to display fresh kills and trophies of anyone that would fight against him, and inside of it there would be combat stims injected directly into his veins, and with a cruel neural link he would even be connected to a series of psychers that would be chained to his armor, feeding him power and fury. In his hands, Calagan wielded Gore Cleaver, a massive two-handed power axe lined with chain teeth and packed with microatomics in each head, essentially allowing it to, upon a killing blow, triggering something known as a blood burst, a detonation in a shower of superheated, irradiated blood that was sure to spread panic and hideous mutation amongst anyone standing close enough. And do remember that while such a thing would certainly normally hurt anyone wielding this weapon, the absolute magnificent refractor field of the armor of pearl would actually protect him for any sort of radiation or any sort of splash damage from this terrible weapon. At his side hung the Stormfang pistol, a custom Volkite caliber weapon fed by a backpack reservoir, unleashing searing beams that ignited blood and fat upon contact and melting even the strongest of armors. When he would venture into battle, he would have chained to his armor by either spite link or neural colors his infamous Storm Dogs, a pair, often twins, of lobotomized psychos twisted into personal attack hounds. On command, they could project powerful warp phenomenon against his enemies and even unleash the infamous Rain of Blood, which was known to accompany his forces in the field of battle. This rain was corrosive warp precipitation that would melt armor and flesh alike, and anyone who had been exposed to this torrent would find himself slowly dying, meaning that to face this warlord in battle would mean certain death, even for those managing to escape. Upon his mighty soldiers, Calagan would hang a trophy mantle, stitched with flayed skin of enemy commanders, soaked in chemical preservatives, and making a grand display out of all of those who had dare stand against him. and as a part of this mantle, a voxcasters would blare out constant chants of his glories and victories, creating an aura of dread and awe when gazing upon this absolute madman of a warlord. His troops follow a simple way of making war. His troops follows a similar way of making war. Ursh's armies were mobile, genocidal madmen and hordes that rolled across the steppes like a tide of annihilation. They would thrive on slaughter and blood rituals and warp sorcery, and their infamous and most elite blood-marked reapers were steppe warriors clad in blood-crusted power armor, adorned with the skulls of the enemies and flayed skin. They would often be gene-augmented for relentless aggression and inhuman pain tolerances. And inhuman pain tolerance were quite commonplace, and when battle would begin, they would prefer an ecstatic charge to getting close and losing themselves in the frenzy of close quarters combat, using all manner of chain axes, blades, shotguns, and scaven bolt-based weaponry. An elite formation within the Reapers are the two-glove Lancers, a soldier formation charged with the usage of the brutal blood-spike weapons. These are lance-like power blades that deliver gene toxins that would, upon impact, turn flesh volatile, meaning that any wounds from such a weapon would either spread mutation or begin to uncontrollably hemorrhage, meaning that even a small wound by such a weapon would be fatal. Earlier, I mentioned the Storm Dogs, and I might have made it sound like that only Calagan would be using these terrible creatures, but alas, while the most powerful ones would become the Warlord's personal weapons, anyone else of these formations was sent running ahead of the actual horde. Enslaved either by lobotomization or by narcotics, these psychers would be sent ahead, summoning all manner of psychic storms and even minor demons to tear at the enemy's lines, working as probably some of the most terrible shock troopers that would soften the lines of the enemies before the glory-seeking Reavers would strike. But in a grand battle, the Reavers would stay further behind and letting the enemy expend their resources in combating not only the Psyker but also the Ashborn. These men and women were the captured populations, broken, drugged and ritually scarred into disposable and unwilling berserkers. They were thrown forward as living shields, screaming Ursa's war chant as they soaked up enemy fire, armed with little more than what they would individually be able to scavenge up. Supporting this nightmare horde were the terrible war machines known simply as the Red Engines, ranging from colossal smoke-belching super tanks based on ancient chassis from the golden age of tech, armed with atomic cannons or even madness-inducing war powlers, imagine like a sonic emitter that would send out waves that would affect your emotions. Often accompanied by massive dozer blades, these Red Engines can also range to lesser machines that were crafted into life by mad inventors and tech rights. These machines would ground cities into dust, while trophy piles of skulls and banners would flutter from their halls and making the very earth unlivable wherever they would crawl. One special type of Red Engine that gained enough infamy to be named were the Goreflood Crawlers. These were crawling and lumbering artillery platforms, firing shell that released aerosolized warp-tainted blood and mutagenic agents, which would taint the enemy's position and bringing a slow, long death before the hordes would arrive. They turned battlefields into corrosive, hallucinogenic mud that slowed enemies and twisted their bodies and flesh in such a way that the word war crime just does not cut it. Calagan's way of war was to be incredibly mobile force, hell-bent on bringing a creeping death across the steppes. His core strength was simple but devastating. Manpower from the conquered tribes of bloodthirsty warrior cultures, warp sorcery using chain psychers for support, and salvage heavy war machine made to soften up the enemy before the bloodshed would begin. His method was relentless, and his horde would advance under gore-soaked banners, focused not on building an empire, but to conquer and fight forever. This was Calagan. The two warlords clashed amid a circle of butchery. Calagan struck first, a thunderous overhead blow from Gore Cleaver that could have felled a tank. The Emperor parried with his sword, the impact sending a shockwave that flattened warriors for dozens of meters. Calagan's refractor field flared brilliantly, absorbing the Emperor's return strike and psychic lances, the pearl sheen rippling like water. They fought like gods of war. Calagan's brute strength and warp-enhanced fury met the Emperor's transcendent skill and psychic might. Gore Cleaver scored a glancing hit against the Emperor's shoulder, drawing burning white blood. In return, the Emperor shattered one of Calagan's storm dogs with a focused psychic blast, causing a backlash that would kill 3 more and momentarily weaken the armor of Pearl's field. Valdor and a cadre of Custodes pressed forward, cutting down the remaining chained psychers and Reaver bodyguards. With his sorcerer's support collapsing and Daemons banished, Calagan's aura of invincibility cracked. The Emperor pressed the attack. A devastating strike from his blade finally overloaded the refractor field in a brilliant flash. The disruption left Calagan exposed but for a heartbeat, and in that moment, before the armor of Pearl would reset the field, a squad of Thunder Warriors unleashed a point-blank volley of bolter fire into the Warlord's torso, followed by the Emperor's sword thrusting forward. Calagan of Earth, the blood god of the steppes, fell to his knees. His final act was a defiant roar as he swung Gore Cleaver one last time. The Emperor sidestepped and delivered the blow that ended the conflict and would see the Warlord imprisoned for the last of his days. And thus was the end of the Warlord of Ursh. However, the Emperor's most wanted list has several others on it. Amongst these are Nartha and Durn. The poison sea of the Pan-Pacific bloc boiled with radioactive foam as the Emperor's legions advanced upon the shattered archipelagos and toxic hive wastes. From the polluted waters rose towering fortress spires like blackened fangs, their walls bristling with salvaged Dark Age of tech weaponry. This was Nathan Durn's final stronghold, the heart of his paranoid empire, transformed into a vast interconnected web of kill zones, with every corridor, every shoreline and every street designed to annihilate invaders. High above the carnage, Nathan Durn watched everything. Linked through, the panacoptic crown fused to his Vanta black voidplate armor. He saw the battlefield with perfect clarity. Thousands of spy drone, hidden augmetic eyes, and ancient orbital relics fed him real-time vision of every battle. Standing within the command sanctum of the Eternal Vigil, a massive panacoptic sentinel walker fused into the central spire, Durn observed the approaching host with cold detachment. His voice, calm and merciless, echoed across the boxnet. Let them come. Every step they take will cost them everything. No one leaves this empire alive or unchanged. Nathan Durn was the ultimate paranoid high-tech tyrant of the Unification War. A cold and calculating genius who ruled through mass surveillance and forbidden Dark Age tech, allowing him to control and dominate his populace. His entire doctrine revolved around control, information dominance, and turning his domain into an inescapable death trap, and his choice of weapons and armors definitely depicts this. He would personally wear the Void Plate, which was a sleek and almost perfect pristine piece of high-end Dark Age of technology armor, all colored in perfect Vanta black, meaning that it would almost seem like it would suck in light. Having a layered refractive field would make him incredibly difficult to kill, along with the armor's impressive capability of nimbleness. This allowed him to basically evade most gunfire, and if something were to actually hit him, this deflective field would almost guarantee him to be unhurt. Built into this incredible piece of hardware was the neural link panoptic crown. This piece of technology granted him godlike battlefield awareness, as it allowed him to tap into data streams, video feeds, and emit commands to control emitters embedded deep in technology or even people, meaning that any territory claimed by Durn would, the longer that he could control it, become almost an extension of himself. In his hand he carried the Truth Eater Disintegrator. This weapon was a rare, let's see if I can pronounce this word, Adratic-derived carbine. Basically, this Adratic refers to a series of weapons that are still in usage in 40k, but it's the Imperial version of Gauss weaponry and disintegrator-based weapons. So basically, when I say Adratic-derived carbine, you should consider this a molecular disruptor beam, meaning that anything hit with it would simply have its bonds of its atoms destabilized to the point that it would turn to ash or, in most cases, explode. Targets hit by it would unravel at the atomic level, while when the weapon would hit non-organic targets, it would release a data-corrupting phage virus that spread throughout enemy voxnets or even cogitator networks, turning their own technology against them by allowing him to access it or to scramble his enemies' communication networks. His gauntlets was equally deadly, as the left gauntlet had embedded within it a phase shifter, which means that it would project a short-range field that would allow him to become temporarily intangible or pass weapons through armor and objects, meaning that in close quarters combat it would be pointless to actually wear any sort of protection against him. The right gauntlet contained a neurotoxin injector array and a gravity crusher capable of collapsing skulls and crushing armors like tin can. At his side we would find the Silent Judgment, heavily augmented retinue of Enforcer automata enslaved directly to his neural crown. They possessed technology that made them able to project suppression fields, meaning that they would basically create fields of gas that would induce vivid hallucinations of betrayal amongst enemies, aside from common weaponry, which I can only assume there would be plenty of. This would allow the Silent Judgment to enter the chaos with powerful las weapons and silencing any resistance against their master. Durn wielded another Dark Age of Technology relic called the Forbidden Data Scepter. This would be a staff that contained purged libraries of dangerous knowledge that had been censored during the Golden Age of Technology. It could unleash holographic illusions, mimetic kill scripts, or overload enemy neural implants with catastrophic bursts of overloading data. I personally like to think here that this scepter is not actually meant to be a weapon, but it's simply capable of transferring data to such an extent that any sort of technology that is currently available at this time cannot handle it, and as such it completely overloads and fries people. This means that with such a varied arsenal, no matter what sort of conflict and what sort of opponent he would come up against, he will always have an option, and he would never find himself cornered no matter what would come his way. His forces were also disciplined and technological superior to most forces on Terra at this point. They specialized in static defense, attrition, and their way of war was turning every inch of ground into a true killing field. His absolute elite panoptic enforcers were heavily armored cybernetic, basically cyborgs, and some of them could barely be considered human, They would serve as both elite infantry and mobile surveillance nodes. They moved with phase shift cloaks, which allowed them to become almost wraith-like to anyone with a lesser technological understanding. And just to really put the point across here, they were also fitted with a specialized neural suppressor that would basically prevent any sort of disloyalty, and even in a lot of cases any sort of free thinking for anything that wasn't orders given directly by the warlord. Another formation of troops within Durn's forces was the dreaded Vanisher Purge cadres. These were stealth-augmented kill teams equipped with Adratic disintegrators, and there was that word again, so basically they're armed with disintegrator weapons and dataphage weapon akin to those that the warlord was already using, but I'd like to think not as advanced. They were masters of urban warfare and specialized in silently eliminating scouts, supply lines, and anyone who would become inconvenient within his realm, functioning as both a military force but also his own personal secret police. The very lowest rung of his vast army belonged to the hive-waste levies. These conscripts were taken into his forces and all implanted with control emitters and kill switches, as while Durn needed to expand and replenish his forces, he was far too aware that infiltrators would try anything to learn of his secrets. These levies were used as basically disposable screens to soak up fire, while the real defenders held fortified positions, gunning down both enemies and levies as soon as any kill zone was set up. In large-scale conflicts, his forces would bring terrifying war machine called the Panoptic Sentinel Walkers. These multi-legged Dark Age of Technology monstrosities were derived from heavy industrial walkers, protected by overlapping shields and armed with graviton projectors that used to be for mining operations, but with a few modifications now served as terrible heavy support weapons using gravitational attacks. But his absolute trump card, only to be deployed in desperate actions, were the kill zone obliterators. These super heavy tracked fortresses were bastions of firepower, as they would be mounting molecular disintegrators, rat cannons, and automated drone swarms that would allow them to kill heavy targets and infantry alike. Entire districts could be turned into lethal crossfire zones in mere moments whenever these was deployed. However, I'd like to think that the reason why he was so keen on holding back using these particular things was both how much they would reveal that he actually possessed, but also maybe he wasn't capable of getting more of them. Durn's doctrine was one of grinding defense attrition. He did not seek glory through conquest, but instead he turned the Pan-Pacific territories into an interconnected web of death designed to bleed invaders dry. Panoptic networks gave him total awareness, and enemies were lured into pre-prepared kill zones where graviton projectors, rat storm, disintegrator batteries, and automated defenses would tear them apart. His signature tactic became known as the Vanishing Purges. Stealth cadres eliminated scouts and supply lines, while heavy walkers erupted from below to sow chaos. Paranoia-inducing psi fields and dataphage weapons spread distrust and madness through the enemy ranks, and any sign of weakness among his peoples were met with immediate execution via their implanted kill switches. Fighting against this warlord would never be a glorious crusade. It was brutal, exhausting slugfest across ruined archipelagos and poisonous seas, where every meter of ground cost oceans of blood. His intelligence, preparation, and understanding of power made him one of the most dangerous obstacles the Emperor faced. Cold, calculated, and paranoid to the core, this was Nathan Durn, the man who tried to watch everything and control everything. Durn finally descended from his eternal vigil to meet the threat directly. Surrounded by his Vanisher Purge cadres and a retinue of silent judgment automata, the Emperor met him in the shuttered plaza before the spire. the ground littered with the death of both sides. Around them, Valdor and the Custodes dueled Durm's enforcers in a storm of golden light and black armor, while Thunder Warriors held back the desperate counter-attacks of the remaining levies. Durn fought not with a savage fury, but with cold precision. He phased throughout the Emperor's opening strikes, firing a Truth Eater beam that scorched the Emperor's warplate and released data phages into nearby Imperial systems. He spoke even as he fought, calm, probing words laced with dangerous insight. "You're no unifier, pretender. I have seen the patterns. I know what you truly are." The Emperor's response was a devastating psychic assault that overloaded Durm's panacopter crown, flooding the Warlord's mind with visions and momentarily disrupting his control over his empire-wide defense network. Durn staggered, his paranoia turned inward for a critical second as his own system fed him false betrayal signals, and in this moment of hesitation, the Emperor closed the distance. His sword shattered Durm's face fields in a blaze of power, and Valdor struck simultaneously, disarming the Warlord and driving a Guardian Spear through the shoulder joint of his void plate. Durn fought on with gauntlet-mounted graph crushers and his neurotoxins, wounding several Custodes, but the tide had turned. The Emperor delivered a final precise strike that crippled Durn without killing him. The tyrant of the Pan-Pacific fell to his knees, his empire's defensives collapsing in a cascading failure as his neural link finally went dark. But alas, Big E's list goes on and on. The continent of South America had become a single festering wound. Once the proud heart of ancient Brazil, it was now an unbroken nightmare of overcrowded hive cities, fortress cantons, and poisoned industrial heartlands. Billions upon billions of souls were crammed into this pressure cooker empire ruled by the warlord Dalmouth Kun. The very air hung thick with the stench of promethium, toxic chemicals, and rotting flesh. From his command throne of the Forge Heart, a colossal hive-breaker siege engine fused into his capital. Dalmouth Kun watched the Emperor and waited. He wore his Forge King carapace, heavy industrial power armor reinforced with layered hive plate and with bundles of gene-forced muscles that would flex in anticipation. The suit was stained with generations of chemical residue and blood, and in one massive gauntlet he gripped his purge maul, while his left has been replaced by the brutal Hivebreaker gauntlet. His voice was amplified through every vox horn and propaganda tower across the hives, booming with a cold, ruthless efficiency.
They bring their gene-forged toys and golden lapdogs. We bring the weight of humanity itself. Feed them to the grinder. Break their bones. Break their bloodlines. There are always more mouths to feed.
And with that command, the flesh tide was unleashed. Dalmouth Kun, the meat lord of Rio Brazil, ruled an empire where human lives were the most abundant and ultimate renewable resource. His war gear was built for brutal industrial efficiency and endless meat grinder warfare. Shunning fancy dark age of technology tech for more proven and maintainable weaponry and forces, protecting him is what is called the Forge King's carapace. This is an absolutely massive suit of heavy armor that was more akin to a personalized siege engine. Beneath the layers of plate, in order to actually move them, was several bundles of artificially grown muscle fibers that had been grafted upon his flesh, giving Dalmouth the raw physical might to move this armor even in an unpowered state. Additionally, this armor was fitted with a custom-made stim dispenser that would augment him even further with all manner of chemicals depending on the situation. Fitted over the armor was the mantle known as Mother's Gift, a chemical mantle that constantly leaked a personalized chem cocktail that would boost his strength and pain resistance even further, while also creating a cloud of irradiated particles around him that would sicken anyone who came near him. His signature weapons were among some of the most terrifying things developed during the Age of Strife, not the Age of Strife, that's another time, during this age, and they were all dependent on his powerful frame in order to even be wielded, and most people couldn't, and even Thunder Warriors would consider this an incomparable weapon. He wielded the Abomination Spitter, a shoulder-mounted gene-locked cannon that would hose targets with a pressurized mutagenic sludge, rapidly turning them into short-lived pain-maddened flesh thralls that, due to the sheer pain and trauma of the attack, would be rendered mad and attack anyone near them before collapsing into a melting heap. For close quarters combat, he will wield his twin purge mauls, weapons embedded with vibro engines, allowing them to deliver crushing blows that would burst apart even power armored targets and spread around the rat-tainted neurotoxins from Mother's Gift. His terrible cumbersome armor was also fitted with a Hivebreaker gauntlet, an early prototype power claw that would tear through armor and could even burrow into fortifications with ease. Everything that he would wield was brutalistic, and his own personal forces were no different. The lowest and most numerous were the Flesh Thralls, poorly armed conscripts, often including civilians, pumped to the gills with combatant drugs and pain suppressants, along with being hosed down with all manner of mutagenic agents, creating a ravaging horde that would be hurled forward as living shields to drown out the enemy with sheer numbers. Supporting them were the Draco elites, Kun's personal guard of scaled green armored clad warriors in distinct Reptilian scaled power armor. These heavy elites were ruthless and heavily armed with lesser purge mauls and toxin dispensers, making them the most feared fighters of Sudmerica, as the longer they would fight, they would spread a miasma of death around them. Even more horrifying were the gene-forged abominations, mutant shock troops rapidly created in on-site forges. These hulking, short-lived berserkers were basically a combination of mutant and cyborgs in a deadly fusion, and what flesh remained would be capable of being regenerated during combat before they would eventually burn out due to this overloaded metabolism. These would be embedded within the flesh tide, this horde of lesser thralls that he was sending forward, meaning that one moment when engaging you would be fighting what would be considered fodder, and the next moment you would be up against a regenerating monstrosity filled to the gills with cybernetic weaponry. Back in this endless tide of flesh were Kun's war machines known as the Hivebreaker siege engines. These were enormous super heavy tanks with dozer blades, mass graviton rams, and abomination spitter cannons that sprayed the previously mentioned mutagenic sludge across entire formations, rendering them into terrible mutants. He used specialized meat conveyor transports, basically crude but incredibly heavily armored APCs that were originally used during the Dark Age of technology to mass transport livestock, but now they've been remodeled to deliver the fresh waves of conscripts directly into the meat grinder under covering fire. Kun's strategy was simple, as it is horrifying. Drown the enemy in bodies, while industrial might ground the rest into dust. And hey, if your enemy is engaged with your troops and you have a lot more cheaper troops than the enemy, then hosing down your own troops with mutagens is a viable strategy. There's not really much more to say about this warlord, as he was horrible, and horrible. The Emperor met him at the very center of his foundry plaza. Around them, Valdor and Custodes were fighting against the elite guard. And Kun fought with brutal industrial efficiency, clashing down upon the Thunder Warriors and killing them with every blow. He waded through the melee like a walking siege engines, his purge molds crushing power armor and injecting gene-breaking toxins that caused rapid cellular collapse in even the most hardened warriors. The Hivebreaker Gauntlet tore open any Thunder Warriors and injected serums that would curse their bloodlines for generations should any survive. He roared his challenge as he fought.
You offer unity, I offer survival through strength. My people will drown you in their numbers.
The Emperor answered with a transcendent force. His sword shattered Kun's mouth and carved deep wounds across the Forge King's carapace. Psychic lightning burned away the chemical mantle and seared the Warlord's flesh, yet Kun endured, continuing to bringing down any warrior that got near him, even while fighting against what would become the master of mankind. His gene-forged resilience and injectors keeping him on his feet far longer than any normal man, and even when the very last of his forces were broken, he was still standing. But all men must fall before the master of mankind, and even this monster would be imprisoned in what would become the Imperial Dark Cells. At the very end of Big E's naughty list, we have the very last remaining war. In the shattered archipelago chains of what was once Southeast Asia, the Indonesian bloc stood as one of Terra's most fanatical bastions against the Emperor's vision of unification. Under the iron rule of Cardinal Tang, the ethnarch and self-proclaimed voice of divine purity, an entire region had been twisted into a theocratic eugenics nightmare. Tang preached a return to a pure pre-technological age. His sermons thundered across the ruins, condemning science, machinery, and impure bloodlines as abominations in the eyes of the divine. Yet, behind the burning pyres and holy iconography, his forces wielded forbidden Dark Age relics hidden beneath layers of ritual and faith. Book burnings lit the skies while his warrior marched with gene scanners and rad mutagenic weapons, all frames as instruments of holy judgment. And now, as the Emperor's armies drew near, the golden thunder of unity marching across the poisonous seas and broken islands, Cardinal Tang stood at the ready to receive them.
Let the false Emperor come. We shall meet his soulless machines with the true fire of faith. Every impure soul that marches beneath his banner shall be cleansed, body, bloodline, and memory. This day, the divine themselves judges him, and we are but their instruments.
In the fractured island chains of the Indonesian bloc, one man forged a nightmarish theocratic built on blood, purity, and holy flame. His name was Cardinal Tang, the ethnarch, the self-proclaimed voice of divine judgment, and one of the most fanatical warlords to ever stand against the Emperor during this time. Tang ruled a continent-spanning empire of zealots, where he preached violently against the corrupting forces of technology and even worse of dark evil knowledge, calling for a return to a sacred simplicity. Yet, while his sermons about burning libraries and condemning the machines, his army secretly wielded a lot of really crazy forbidden Dark Age relics hidden beneath layers of religious iconography. From his command pulpit, clad in what was claimed to be the robes of divine purity, Cardinal Tang presented himself as a living saint. These ornate pseudo-holy power armor was disguised as holy vestments flowing with ritual silks, bone icons, and golden scripture plates, but beneath them was a strong, high-grade power armor with a conversion field generator for additional protection. I gotta go into a bit of detail here because a conversion generator is not the same as a refractor field, and I really love the difference because it really highlights the level of manipulation that Cardinal Tang is going into. The conversion field generator is a different piece of tech than the refractor field, as I just mentioned, in that it basically changes incoming energy, such as heat, kinetics, or really any sort of thing that is coming towards you, into a different source of energy. Typically, it means that this field turns, for example, a laser that has hit you into a golden blast of light, meaning that to onlookers, whenever something was trying to hurt Cardinal Tang, holy large blasts of light would spring forth and seemingly protect him, while a refractor field is an ongoing bubble of force that is protecting you. Furthermore, this piece of power armor that he was wearing was fitted with genetic scanners and a lot of medical equipment that basically allowed him to follow and spread his edict, using this armor to almost clairvoyantly follow along with bloodlines and genetics and what he perceived as the purity of his followers. In his right hand, he carried the Flame of Judgment, a massive ritual scepter that doubled as a multi-barreled flamer. It would unleash holy fire, which basically consists of promethium mixed with psychic dampening agents, meaning that he did in fact possess a flamethrower capable of burning supernatural phenomenon. At his side, for deadly close quarters combat, he wielded something called the Bloodline Blade, which was a pair of stiletto daggers with integrated genetic sequencer, meaning that they worked as both weapons and medical tools capable of delivering drugs, medications, or toxins. On contact, it would analyze a victim's DNA and deliver tailored neurotoxins or sterilization agents designed to wipe out inferior bloodlines for generations. Bound physically directly into his armor was a member of the Choir of the Pure. This formation is a retinue of castrated, genetically perfected psychers. They are focused around generating faith warp powers like protective auras around their master, and they would even be able to unleash targeted demonic incursions, all framed as divine wrath, meaning that this holy man was basically carrying an integrated psyker into his armor. The Cardinal's armies were terrifying in their convictions, as very little is truly as terrible as a fanatic with access to war crime levels of weaponry. The Ethnarch Sellers formed the core of his crusade and consisted of genetically perfected fanatics in ritual-adorned armor that, through their faith, were basically immune to fear or any sort of morale breaks. They would charge forward in combat, chanting litanies of purity and cutting down what they saw as the impure with last fire and blades. For support, they could count on the choir-bound psychers who would protect them with warp shields and call upon what was considered divine servants, or what we know as demons, to attack those that they deemed as heretics. Behind the lines moved the black-robed purity enforcers, basically the Cardinal's executioner squads, who would draw any impure elements, even their own comrades, to large pyres mid-battle, meaning that facing this force was both combat and a ritual at the same time. When this holy host advanced, they did so beneath towering war machines called pyre cathedrals that served as both mobile command shrines and massive flamer platforms, broadcasting thunderous sermons while spewing promethium rad mixtures from gigantic sensors. The Judgment Walkers were towering bipedal machines piloted by psychers with the forces of their cardinal. Here, their power would be focused into unleashing conversion beams disguised as holy light. The most terrifying weapon, however, that the Cardinal was in possession of, however, was not fanatics or psychers, but a piece of technology that in modern 40k only the AdMech would possess. and the Admech would consider such a weapon to be an abomination against the Omnissiah, and even this relic from the Dark Age of technology would be considered incredibly dangerous. We're talking about an engine capable of generating an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. Such a wave, when this engine was activated, would wipe out any advanced technology not sufficiently shielded or protected, essentially turning tanks off, or technology large radius just would stop working and never to be turned off, never to be turned on again. This act was seen as holy by his forces, as the Cardinal's sermons was all about returning to a simpler time, and this powerful weapon was considered his will. His signature tactics were as merciless as they were theatrical. Zealots and choir-bound psychers led the charge with unbreakable morale, sterilization crawlers and judgment walkers followed and methodically cleansed territories. Capture's population faced forged genetic breeding programs or immediate mass executions. Public pyres became both punishment and spectacle, while demoralizing enemies while inspiring fanatical devotion in any of his followers. Tang's forces excelled at morale warfare and long-term cultural dominations. They were relentless, self-sacrificing, and utterly convinced of their righteousness. Even in defeat, the scars left by Cardinal Tang's eugenics crusades would linger across the Indonesian region for centuries. This was the nightmare that the Emperor's Thunder Warriors would have to face. A zealous theocrat who weaponized faith itself in his desperate bid to preserve a pure humanity on his own twisted terms. Cardinal Tang stepped forth from the very last remaining pyre temple, his empire around him burning, but he feared no flame. The Emperor strode towards him, having broken the line of faith that his followers had created. The Thunder Warriors, the Custodians, and Constantine Valdor was holding off the hordes while the Emperor would finally put all of this to rest. Tang fought with the fury of a true believer. While clashing with the Emperor, he proclaimed the edicts of purity even as he attacked. The bloodline blades in his hand flashed, scanning and delivering tailored neurotoxins towards the master of mankind, and he denounced the Emperor with every single blow.
You are no savior. You are the ultimate corruption. A witch king who would drag humanity back into the darkness of hubris. I will sterilize your false empire in your name. No, in the name of true purity.
In the end, Cardinal Tang fell to his knees. His divine robes of purity scorched and torn, and the flame of judgment shattered. He still breathed, defiant and with a zealous hatred, but his empire was laying broken. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Emperor's Most Wanted list and all of their followers. Consider leaving a like or a sub, and hey, I didn't expect that I would enjoy interacting so much in the comment section, so please say something about what you liked or how your day has been or anything. I'd really love to interact here, so have a very nice day and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.